The final loop we shall cover is the for loop. This looping structure is another short way of writing a while or a do-while loop. Consider this bit of code here. It is a typical bit of looping code. Execute a statement a set number of times. There's nothing wrong with this code. It's perfectly valid, and no one would ever criticize you for using it. There is, however, a shorter, faster, and more efficient way of doing this, using a for loop. In a for loop, there are three parts to the statements in the brackets. The first part sets the values of the variables that will be used in the statement. In the first example, we only have one variable, n. The starting value of n is set to 0, just as we did above the while statement here. Next, we have our conditional statement. This condition is evaluated just as a while loop's condition. Every time the loop's complete, it checks again that condition. Finally, after another semicolon here, we have the end of loop expression. This will happen as the very last action after the loop statement and instructions. So, when the for loop starts, the very first part is executed, and executed only once. Then, the conditional is evaluated, and if that's evaluated to true, your code block and statements are executed. Once they're finished executing, your end of loop statement is then executed. And next, the condition is checked again. Thus, you can see how the while statement is condensed to a much simpler statement using the for loop. The third example is done using multiple variables. Note how the first and third parts, the different actions are separated with commas. So we have I equal to 1 and n equal to 2, then semicolon, your condition, semicolon, and your end of loop statements. Finally, one last note on loops. There's a special statement you should know about, and that is the break statement. You saw it in the switch statement, and it has a particularly potent use in looping structures. There may well be cases where you want to break out of a loop when some condition is met that is not a part of the conditional statement at the beginning. Here's a good example of one of those cases. In this example, you want to loop x through a maximum of 300 times. So while x is less than or equal to y, which is set to 300. However, you also have a special instance where you can set the maximum number of times to loop it. In this case, the variable c, which we get from the URL. So if x hits that value, we want to break out of that loop, and that's where the break statement comes into play. As soon as this break statement is executed, the loop ends. Any code after that statement is not executed. So if we have, let's say, an increment x here, whatever the value of x is here, we break. That value of x will also be outside the loop. This is not executed. The break statement can be used in any kind of loop, a do while, and for statements. Keep in mind that all code in a loop after a break statement is not executed. That includes the end of loop actions in a for statement. So with the addition of the for loops and conditionals to your arsenal of PHP programming, you now have all of the basics you need to start building proper functional PHP scripts. You have flow control. You know how to execute different parts of a script based on conditions. You know what variables and values are and how to use them. From here, we're going to get into the actual application of the different statements and structures, building functional working scripts. We're also going to expand your knowledge and include mid-level programming knowledge such as functions and arrays, which allow you to create more powerful scripts and solve some very complex programming problems.